all the measurements have been able to verify that there was a singular event that took place some 12 to 15 billion years ago, and out of that event, everything that we consider to be the totality emerged. It also appears that the expansion was very rapid. In other words, that it was an enormously powerful explosion, if we can use that language. I mean, they do call it a Big Bang. Not that anybody could hear it, but nonetheless. And what we do know is that, as far as we can see right now, the totality is continuing to expand, and everything appears, at least from the point of view of our perspective, everything appears to be moving further apart from everything else. And the only way to understand that, the basic inflation of the universe, is to simply imagine what it's like to have a balloon in your hand that is not inflated and you draw dots on it. You can draw two dots very close to each other, but by the time you blow up the balloon, they are further apart from each other. And in that sense, everything is further apart from everything else. There are some things that we understand in the physics that are deeply aligned to the way in which we present at a mystical level the nature of the beginning. That is, within the mystical context, human design is a dualistic system, and so everything about the nature of the beginning is that there was a fundamental duality that was at work, and without that duality there was no juxtaposition, no illusion, no existence. Physics basically says the same thing. That is, it says that there was a yin and a yang. Now it uses a different formula. It says there's energy and matter. However you want to describe it, the physics goes back to very much the same thing. The other thing is that at the very beginning, as far as they can tell, there was only two families of things. Now again, this is the way in which they divide up the very beginning. In other words, the moment that the physicists begin the construction of the totality, they have to begin with a basic duality. The duality they begin with is what they call quarks and leptons. You're getting a little bit of a science lecture tonight, so hold on a bit. Don't get nervous. Quarks and leptons. And quarks and leptons are important to us in understanding certain basic constructs of personality and design. That is, when you're looking at quark, you're looking at the fundamental form principle. In other words, you're looking to something that is deeply aligned to what we call the design crystal and the design as a yin aspect. Quark is a great name, by the way, because it truly does not mean anything, which of course it just means what quarks are now. But it was some scientist who had just, somebody who was infatuated with James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, and the way Joyce would write the word quart, somebody going into an Irish pub and ordering a quark beer, and it was it was spelled quark. And obviously this physicist was very turned on by that name, and it's now gone into into the Maya as our description of these very early building blocks of some atomic world. The quark, there's 6 kinds of them. And when they first postulated them, they gave them names. By the way, they don't have these names anymore, which is really interesting. But they gave them names, and the names were up, down, strange, charm, beauty, and truth. And it was one of my standing jokes in the early 90s, actually in the mid-90s, was that they had built this enormous particle accelerator, I think in Italy, in order to find truth. Which I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Here's the European Union, the Americans and the Japanese investing God knows what, $200 or $300 million to build a machine that's going to find truth. They did, by the way, find truth, which isn't that nice for all of us? So you have these 6 components. Now, when you think about it, the quarks, if you look at the nature of the totality, everything that you can imagine that is substance, I mean, everything that you can imagine that is material, whether it is stars or asteroids or whatever you can imagine, all of that is atomic. It's atomic in nature. And the basic atom has a very basic construct. That is, you have neutron, proton, electron. And the neutron, which is at the core, the very core of the atom, which is the, if you can call it that, the gravitational mass that holds an atom together, that core is made up of quarks. In other words, a basic building block. On the other side was the lepton family. So we go from the yin quark, and we go over to the yang lepton. Now, the lepton family is very interesting, because when they first postulated the lepton family, they said it had two components. And they said what made the lepton family so uniquely different from the quark family is that the lepton family was fundamentally energy. In other words, the polarity to the material principle of the quark. So what you had in the leptons is they listed electrons and neutrinos. But you see, when leptons were postulated as the polarity to the quark, the neutrino was considered to be an energy form. I mean, energy. It wasn't considered to have any mass. And of course, this is, of all the things that solidified in many ways my own mystical process, was that when I was given the basis upon which the whole construct worked, which was the neutrino with mass, and the neutrino representing, both in many ways hardware and software as far as the consciousness field operates, that, the verification that took place in the late 1980s of the neutrino having mass has really given a very, very powerful bedrock to the juxtaposition theory and the way in which the voice described the mechanisms of the totality. Because the reality is, and I'm giving you all of this scientific sort of overview so you can begin to grasp, in a way, what I'm going to show you from the mystical side, or from the cosmological side in terms of the language we're using here. So it was postulated that the leptons were pure energy and they were electron and neutrino. Now, of course, what we have come to discover is that, in fact, it's not really all yang. It isn't. And this leads us to something very mystical. See, the voice described the totality to me as an unborn entity, something that I have in my own inner process I think of as the child. And I think of it as child simply because that is the only kind of word I can imagine, in a sense. I could call it fetus, which would probably be much, much closer, but I guess I like the poetry, if you will, of child more than anything else. The reality is, whatever the hell it has not emerged. It is not emerged into the domain of where it was initiated. In other words, that it is within something. I mean, it is within something. Now this totality, the child, according to the voice, I mean, we actually have, what do we have? We only have a couple of men in the room. We're three of us all together, so it's really okay to say this. If they're upset, girls, I think that we should just ignore them. But the fact is that this baby is going to be, I can't say female. I don't even know what that would mean within this kind of context. But it certainly is not going to be yang. It's going to be yin, whatever it is. And it's something to understand about the joke, in a way, of how the cosmologists, the physicists, are trying to figure out now how to come up with, where do you put the neutrino now in the story of the beginning? And of course their temptation, because it's a matter principle, is to try to somehow find a way to align it with the quark. And of course this is not what it's all about. What they don't understand is that the game is rigged to the benefit of the yin. Everything about physics is that physics can only operate within Einstein's world. There's no other place for physics to live. Albert did a very good job of laying a foundation of illusion, the great foundation of light, E equals mc squared. Don't pay attention to anything when there's no light, because if there's no light, there's nothing. So everything about the cosmology that is understood by the physicists is rooted in the illusion of relativity. What they do not understand is that at the mechanical level, that the game is not even. That is, there is not this equality between energy and matter. In Einstein's equation, energy and matter must be equal to each other. It is a law of the physicist that matter can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only be interchanged. It's always, in the illusion, a balanced game. But it's not. Shh. It's not. And it would really freak them out to grasp that. You see, while I watch the physicists in the Einstein realm predict that, we are going to have an ever-expanding universe, they're seeing that through the lens of the light and the assumption that it's a balance game. In other words, that the explosion from the beginning is greater than any of the mass that can be established to slow it down. Oh, do they have that wrong? But they don't know that the game is rigged. They don't know that it's loaded on the side of the form principle. And in the end, it is the form principle that's going to win. So the physicists have a problem. And this is why they can't get back to a formula that simply grasps this. See, if you look at juxtaposition theory, and we will look at juxtaposition theory, what you really get to see is that it's out of whack. In other words, it does not follow the same principle. It talks about juxtaposition. Juxtaposition is not the same as an equal sign. The E equaling M. This does not exist in juxtaposition. You can have E juxtaposed to M, but that's very different. It doesn't mean that they're equal, and they're not. And they're not. It's like when people first asked me about 88 degrees of the sun. This mysterious 88 degrees between the time that the personality enters into the vehicle and the time of conception. And, they asked me, why is it 88 degrees? And I could never have an answer in the sense of why it's specifically 88 degrees. But it's very obvious, if you look at the way in which design works, that if the distance was 90 degrees, everything would be stillborn. It's only with the 88 degrees that you get the shifting that leads to the profiles and so forth and so on. It's slightly off. It's what I call the mystical left angle. It's not a right angle. And one of the things for us to see, because after all, we are working at, I don't want to call it rave physics, but we are working with another way of seeing how the structure was built in the first place. And our first rule is to understand something, that we are not talking about equal. We are not talking about yang equaling yin. We're talking about yin being much more powerful than yang. And it's all a yin game. And what you will see is that the yin has an enormous capacity to imitate the yang. Imitate the yang. After all, that's all a male is within the human construct, is a manipulated imitation of female. But I don't want to get into that now. So when we go back to the very beginning, let us begin with a premise, and let's see where we go with this premise as we move along. And the premise that we begin with is that yin is always superior to yang. Always. and that the only time that yang appears in the illusion to be superior to yin is because the yin is allowing it to be so. It's just the way that it is. And it's very important to see that you can follow that line through the macrocosm down to the microcosm, and you can see its fundamental truth. It's like this era of patriarchy that we've had since the time of Homer. This is not a triumph of the yang. This is a manipulation of the yin. But it'll take you some time to really see that as we move along, but we'll move along. Let's start here with our first illustration. And what you're looking at in terms of that upside down triangle and that, the shading that's sort of in the center, it's almost like it is a kind of hard edge cell, if you will. This is the ban. This is the yang. Now, one of the things to understand about how rigged the game is that embedded here in this yang is a monopole, and it doesn't belong there. It's just something to begin with. But at the same time, we know something about monopoles. Here's your first mystery tonight. We know something about monopoles. Monopoles have no connection to personality crystals. None. Personality crystals do not have a form into which a monopole can embed. And yet here, we are talking about the prime yang force. We're talking about the prime yang crystal. That's basically what this illustration is trying to show you. The prime yang crystal. And embedded in that prime yang crystal is a monopole. The prime monopole. It's not possible. Something must be wrong. And something is. It's an illusion, what we live. You see, our assumption is that in the duality, in the beginning, there was yin and yang. And there wasn't. And there wasn't. There was yin and yin. I'll let you digest that for a moment. I'll make that clearer as we move along. We have some mysteries to look at tonight, or today, depending on your time. Wait a second. Okay. This is the two. And the two has always been inside. And when you're looking at this, you're looking at the design, the prime design crystal as an illustration. And you also see that there's this kind of greenish, yellowish cellular center that's there as well. And what you're looking at is that you're actually looking at what are called anti-neutrinos. I mean, it is an anti-neutrino field, and it only becomes neutrinos. In other words, it only changes its polarity when you get to the point of the Big Bang and the Yang and the Yin bang into each other. So what you're looking at here is something very important to grasp from the beginning. When you're dealing with a prime design crystal, it has an absolutely intrinsic relationship to neutrino. It is carrying with it the neutrino potential. In other words, the neutrino with mass that is going to be the web, literally the web, the ocean of information that is going to bind together all forms. All forms. I mean, there was in 1985, I disappeared in 1983 and I ended up here in Ibiza. And my first job that I got was teaching in a country school. And after a couple of years of that, I simply opened up an experimental school. And I took in about half a dozen kids, and I took them through a 4-month program of teaching them the history of the universe and all kinds of ancient memory techniques, and it was really quite a trip. It was really quite a trip. They're all in their 30s now. They still remember that experience because it was really something that was extraordinary. And when I was showing them the nature of the universe, National Geographic, 1985, National Geographic had a special on the nature of the universe, what physics and cosmology were thinking in that time. And there was a graphic illustration in there that absolutely blew me away. I mean, absolutely blew me away. It was a graph based on how the universe would look if we could be outside of it and only see it according to the density of neutrinos. It was unbelievable. I mean, it was unbelievable. It looked like, it looked sort of like what a cell looks like in a microscope. Excuse me. It was kind of amorphous. But it was the first time that I had this funny feeling. I mean, this was years before, it was 2 years before I would have my experience. I had this creepy feeling about, the universe as a form. Now, as a form, because you never really think of it that way. I mean, we look at the universe as wholes. It's like there's all this blackness, and, rarely does anyone in this life even get the experience, when you look through a very, very powerful telescope to suddenly discover that the night sky is so alive with light, it's unbelievable. People who live in cities don't even know their stars, But anyway, to see the form of it. So when you're looking here at the prime design crystal, and remember that prime design crystal is going to be responsible for the entire form construct of what we call the universe, that embedded in it is the whole potential of the neutrino ocean. So there is this deep, deep, deep fundamental connection between these two. And both of them we can legitimately look at as yin. In other words, we're looking at a yin-yin. The moment that we go back, the moment that we are here and we're looking at the ban again, you can see that we are no longer talking about yang-yang. We're not. We're not. It's not possible. Because we have the dilemma of the monopole. The monopole can only be embedded in a design crystal. And yet what's going on? I mean, this is supposed to be yang. Okay, now let's talk about something else before I solve the riddle for you. It says here, the ban came from the outside. The outside? And the outside of what? To me, it's one of the most fascinating aspects of the knowledge that I was given. That when you think about a human conception as an example, and you think about the actual size of the combination of the sperm and the egg 24 hours after conception, and you compare that size to what it's going to be when it is born, and you map out the growth pattern, which is exponentially very, very powerful. I mean, to watch, any of these graphic illustrations or photographs of the development of fetuses, it's something to understand about the nature of the biverse that we live in, that it was there before the ban came. But it was there in the sense of being dormant. It was there in the same sense that, an egg can hang around and never get fertilized. But the fact is that the entire potential of that egg is all there and waiting. And this is something that, the physicists do not grasp. They have no way of grasping that. They've got a problem, and the problem goes back to Einstein and light. You see, everything about the way in which physics measures the universe and all the information in the universe only begins the moment that there is light. Only. So the moment before there is light, the moment that there is the potential that is there, it is not seeable within the physics of light. It's just not. but it was there. It's what I love to call the beginning before the start. There was a beginning before the start. There is a fractal that is so incredible. There is a beginning. And it's very, very important for us to understand that this didn't come out of nothing. Everybody's got this trip about, the physics and cosmology that, somehow this is a miracle, that it all emerged out of nothing. Well, it didn't emerge out of nothing. It's just that in terms of physics, it's nothing because you can't see it. Because you can only see things when there's light. And when there's no light, you don't see it. You can't. We can't go back any further than the explosion. Not within the context of our tools. That's why we have revelation. That's why there are such things. It's clear to me that probably all the basic knowledge that humanity has ever had has been the result of revelation. In one way or another. Because revelation comes with other descriptions to what the phenomena is. Inspirations, satori's, creative sparks, whatever you want to call it. So let's begin with something. The ban came from the outside. It came from the outside. It had come in. And then you begin to understand why the ban has a magnetic monopole. Aside from our mystery of how is it possible since this is yang. But the band with its magnetic monopole, the moment that you've got a magnetic monopole, you have a way of driving. You have the driver. You have the ultimate chauffeur. It knows precisely where to go. And it is the monopole embedded, the prime magnetic monopole embedded in the band that knows where to find the two. So we go from the band coming from the outside, and here we get to the two, and we get to the two, and the two has always been inside. It was always there. Whatever that means. Always, always is always is always. Everything has always been inside. The outside of the biverse is still inside. And these are the one that we possess as two. I love to do these plates. I have to confess to you. It's about as close as I get to really old incarnations. This kind of, interpreting the word. It's what Kabbalah actually is. Kabbalah is a commentary on the first 5 books of the Torah, the Talmud. This is commentary. It's commentary on what was inspired information. It is very, very difficult, in a sense, for me to have all of the language. I guess it's because of my unconscious mind that there is this potential. But the fact was that in my experience, like in the storytelling of the cosmology, so much of my experience was a way of taking in information that did not seem to be conscious for me, and yet things that were clear to me, things that crystallized very quickly without my having to go down, in a sense, into deeper levels. And here, everything has always been inside. Everything. The whole potential of the totality, has been waiting in that sense, and has been waiting within something. The outside of the biverse is still inside. It's like, there are so many layers to illusion. And cosmology is the greatest of all illusions. The greatest of all illusions. Whatever this entity is, there is, if I can use the word a world, there is a place, a world, an environment, whatever you may call it, where they belong. And yet that very world is contained within a ring past naught. I mean, I don't want to get into, because I've mentioned it, but it becomes absurd after a while. You know, the Russian dolls, you know, where you keep on taking off, and there's another one inside, and so forth and so on. There is a limitation to the game. Not that I truly know how many steps all of this takes. But what I do understand is this absolutely beautiful statement at the bottom. These are the one that we possess as two. So if we go back and we think about, hold on a second here. We go back and think about the band, and we think about this magnetic monopole, and we're talking about the one that we experience as two. And the thing to see very clearly about that is that we have this illusion that in the beginning was a prime design crystal and a prime personality crystal, and the reason we have that illusion is that I created it, in the sense that I was its spokesperson, because that's how I was told to describe it. And yet at the same time, within the cosmology lies, you know, the real truth. And of course this real truth will lead us into a very, very deep place about understanding the life program and the way the life program works. You see, the band is a design crystal. I mean, in the beginning there were two crystals of consciousness, and one was very yin and one was less yin, but they were both design crystals. And that's something to take in very, very deeply, about how densely we are part of what is a form principle, how dense that is. These are the one that we possess as two. They're two different kinds of design crystal. That's very important. Many of you, or at least some of you, not many actually, some of you I think, have experience or no knowledge of my Grey courses, and know that when I have often taught the great final cycle that ultimately is part of the consciousness development, and I have described, I have the design of and the configuration for a vehicle for that era, which is called an Aeron, and that vehicle possesses three crystals. It possesses two design crystals, two different kinds of design crystals, and what will ultimately be a personality crystal. And the fact is that those two different kinds of design crystals, are in terms of our understanding on the surface, we would see them as a design and personality. The game is rigged, and it's very, very important, to really chew on this and understand it. In the beginning was two different kinds of design crystals. What does that say about consciousness? And what does that say ultimately about the personality crystal that you're endowed with, through which you process the consciousness field? And it's for you to begin to think about the fact that it's not a personality crystal. It's an imitation personality crystal, because we haven't received the personality crystal yet. It's useful when thinking about the cosmology of the child, to think about the fetus, and to think about the fetus, human fetus, as a microcosm of what it's doing in the first 2 trimesters, given that it's a normal pregnancy. I mean, what it's doing before the 88-degree click-in of personality. What it's doing is it's building a form principle. I mean, it's building a form principle that can house the potential of consciousness. It's building a form principle that can house the potential of consciousness. Why do you think we are all so deeply in the thrall of the program? Because the program has to manage the consciousness field. There is no personality to do so. There are these different experiments in the form of filtering consciousness. That's quite a thing to begin to grasp. You see, what you see on the surface, you always have to remember that it is not the byproduct of an equation of equals. It's always about juxtaposition. And juxtaposition saying is that in the illusion that is the result of the forces juxtaposed, that the illusion is weighted by the components, but something new totally emerges. Something different. And these two different kinds of design crystals, and they will be very, very important for us to understand, so that you can understand why people think that they're from the Pleiades or from Sirius. Why people think that, they communicate with these forms and those forms and Uncle Louie who's dead and all this stuff. It's all about the way in which these two different kinds of design formats actually work. So in the beginning was yin and yin. And you see, when you look at the world now, you can see that the male of the species, what I am, is simply an archetype of imitation yang. It's such a joke. And I'm as yin as they come, eh? I'm Mr. Form. It's a joke. And you have to see it's an extraordinary joke. And it's a wonderful joke to grasp, because it will help you understand the way in which consciousness has been manipulated from the beginning, and how little we have to do with any of it in terms of our personal awareness. You have to separate yourself. You have to see that this is not about trying to incorporate this awareness into what you do on the mundane plane with somebody's chart. There's nothing to do with that. It's about what you do with this in terms of awareness within cosmology. There are no really good philosophers anymore. There aren't, because the construct isn't understood. It's all just playing with language. Part of this is to be able to establish a deep philosophy of how life works. And in order to understand how the life program works, we have to go back to the roots of this life program and understand it's not what everybody thinks it is. It isn't. It isn't. And that the weakest component of the entire process is what we call the passenger. It's the weakest part of the process. Because you see, the passenger is not truly the byproduct of a personality juxtaposed with a design. It isn't. We honestly don't know. And when I say we, that's we as us as it. The totality cannot know, any more than the fetus can know, what kind of a dilemma will arise when the personality shows up, and what actually becomes the being. What is that relationship going to be? We are in a form program, and we are all form principles. One of the things that I find so fascinating, as a kind of irony, because I have a black sense of humor and I do enjoy my ironies, is science fictions and AI, artificial intelligence. And I've seen my share of, computers conquering the world movies, robots, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And it's so interesting to look at that and realize that that's us. The only difference is that we have the illusion of being a biomechanism. And so there is this assumption that we are somehow different than the potential of programming some steel and circuits. Ho ho. I'd like to just let you in on a secret that, we're just very good bio-examples of extraordinarily efficient form programming. So in the beginning, what was on the outside was yin, and what was on the inside was yin. And only when they became juxtaposed to each other could the realm of illusion be established. That's quite a little story. The rave has a personality crystal and a design crystal. They are the same. The ban on the outside is a design crystal, and the two is an egg. Now think about conception. Think about the conception program and the way that it works. You have an egg that is within the female. Now, what is that egg made of? That egg is made up of cells. What does each and every single cell have? It has a design crystal and a magnetic monopole. It has its place and its design. And when you're looking at an egg, you're actually looking at an environment of cells. And every single one of those cells has a design crystal. The male is going to, when has the magnetic monopole guides the sperm directly to the egg and brings its design. We have this beginning then of the conception process. There is no personality, but it is a fundamental relationship that exists between what we call our prime design crystal and all of these cellular design crystals. So when we go back to the very beginning and we're looking at the ban and the two, it's not the two design crystal that you think of as being embedded in your ajna center. That's the ban crystal. And everything that makes up your form, the millions and millions of cells, these are all cellular design. Cellular. They follow the instructions of the prime design crystal. It's simply the way it works. So what we're looking at is that in this program from the beginning, that we're looking at two different kinds of design form mechanisms. We're looking at one that is simply involved in all matter, the two, and the neutrino potential, this interconnectiveness of all material. And what we have coming from the outside is this ability to organize it. This ability to organize it through the potential of the crystal, to be able to organize all of those other design crystals, and to be able to organize them through the neutrino field, and to be able to hold them together with the magnetic monopole. This is where the life program really begins. And it's something to really understand. It's not like there is no energy, but it's to understand that the vast majority of the process is a form process. The design crystal of a rave is cellular. Raves do not possess bodies. They are aspects of a body. They are in fact aspects of what might be described as a gland within the universe or within the biverse. Okay, the design crystal in a rave is cellular. In other words, this is a prime design crystal that organizes all of those other cellular crystals. And so in that way we have an organized form. But what we have in our head centers that we like to describe as personality crystals, in fact, that this is simply an organizing, if you will, design crystal. A design crystal that is there to imitate the potential function of the personality. When, or if, someone could possibly say, the personality finally penetrates from the outside in the same way that the relationship that the totality has to our our metaphor of a fetus is that this is a fetus before it receives its personality crystal. That's what we are as a totality. That is what our consciousness is about. This is why when you look at a description for human being, and you try to describe human being in a way that is universal and differentiated from other species, that there's only one thing that you can actually say: we are tool makers. It is what makes us unique. We are manipulators of the material plane. We are manipulators of the form. And everything about the nature of our science is ultimately about the exploration of form. Whether it is the form looking inward or the form looking outward, it is the form principle that we are concerned with. It was my joy, for example, when they put Hubble up into space, the space telescope. You put Hubble up into space, and it's like the fetus in the womb beginning to open its eyes. Not that there's much to see, but most of it is black with little bits of light here and there. But then again, that's basically what Hubble sees as well. I also thought that it was incredible that Hubble had eye problems and didn't see very well in the beginning, and they had to give Hubble glasses. And that was quite an event. American space plane, the space shuttle. And because it was in such an isolated position, that the only way in which it could be achieved was that the work had to be done by a female astronaut, who was much, much smaller and therefore could fit into what was a very difficult place, because it was never expected that the lens would have to be corrected, so it wasn't designed for easy access. And I think that's just a wonderful piece of cosmology, that in order for us to see our own body, after all, we have this funny experience of seeing our body from the inside out, and this experience of being able to see or discern aspects of our body, that this was achieved and corrected by the yin, not by one of these, Top Gun male fighter pilot characters, but here was this female astronaut, very tiny, up there. And by the way, she was moving an object that weighed something like 9 tons. But of course, you're in weightlessness. But just the idea of it. Anyway, so with this kind of understanding, what I'm going to lead you into in this, this whole first semester is traveling through this cosmology that was given to me in my first evening with the voice. And where this cosmology takes us is that it takes us to the organization of consciousness that is far beyond anything that we can manipulate, control, interfere with. In other words, because we do not possess a true personality, we do not possess a true mutative consciousness. We don't. It's like what I said about human beings and knowledge. I've said it over and over and over again, because there are still people that assume that it's possible to make up this stuff. There's no way that the grasp of the totality and the intricacy of the logic is anything that I'm capable of, or any mind that's ever existed on this planet. In my experience with the voice, I was dwarfed by the consciousness field. Dwarfed isn't even a word. I am made beyond insignificant by just the power of that consciousness. We are not, we are not originators. We don't possess that potential, not yet. Any more than the fetus within the womb originates nothing. It doesn't. It is following a program, a very, very predictable, in a way, program. It's all laid out in that sense, in the infrastructure of the original conception and its chemistry and its dynamics. And this is us. I mean, it's us. I love this line. Raves do not possess bodies. They are aspects of a body. They are in fact aspects of what might be described as a gland within the Biverse. It's interesting in PHS, one of the most fascinating themes is looking at the endocrine glandular system and its relationship in human design. And nothing is more fascinating than the ajna center and its relationship to the anterior and posterior pituitaries. And if there were a way to imagine where Earth is in that sense, and where the consciousness field of our solar system is, that if you could place it inside of a body graph, in other words, if we could take what I described to you earlier, this incredible graphic of an amorphous cellular biverse, that if you could spot the ajna center, then we would be somewhere in there. In other words, this is what we are doing. And in that sense, if you can, take that analogy and take it as far as possible, you can begin to see that the whole that's greater than the sum of the parts of all of us does the same thing that your design crystal does in your body, or for your body. In other words, it is the instrument of the form mechanic that is the thing that houses life. There's a very dangerous thought here, and it's one that I always keep in mind, because there is nothing more natural for human beings than misplaced vanity. The reason that there's consciousness here, the reason that there is what we call life here, all of that, because we have an illusion of it, all of that is secondary to its purpose. And the purpose is that regardless of where we are in our state of grace, whether we are aware or not, awake or not, that the totality is formed through our instruction. Think about that. I mean, think about your design crystal. The design crystal. I mean, when I talk about design crystal now, I'm just referring to, how we perceive it in the illusion in terms of our designs. When you think about your design crystal, what's your design crystal doing? It's manifesting the biogenetic vehicle. I mean, that's what it does. It programs the whole vehicle. It keeps the whole vehicle going. It translates the consciousness field for the benefit of the vehicle. I mean, that's what it does. And if you don't have a design crystal, you don't have a form and you don't have a life. So if you're looking at the totality of the universe, let me give you a thought. Let's say that we have a great science fiction scenario, and there's some horrible cosmic disease that floats in from outer space, and what it's able to do is it's able to dissolve, eat, whatever you want to call it, all the crystals of consciousness. The result would be the death of the biverse. Every star in the sky would go out. Everyone. Now, it's not just about us, in the sense that it's just human. This is the place where the crystals have gathered. The crystals have gathered in many places. We'll talk about that because we're going to go through that journey. The crystals have always moved in space. They have always moved from place to place in the evolutionary process. Always. You can see that in conception mechanics, how the design crystal moves and the monopole moves in the early stages of the mechanics. It's just part of it. The solar system, this consciousness field, we are responsible for the life. We are it. It is us. This is the whole story. It's why that, it's necessary to understand why a third of our lives are spent unconscious. What we call sleep. It's the way in which the program makes sure that the totality is programmed properly. People think about neutrinos in a funny way. When a neutrino stream is passing through you, basically your relationship to that as an intellectual concept is that you are receiving information. Receiving. But I want you to think about something. If you built a wall 10,000 light years thick, that means a wall that it would take 10,000 years traveling at 186,000 miles a second to get across. So we're talking about a really thick wall. It wouldn't stop a neutrino. So that neutrino that is programming you, flying through at nearly the speed of light, zipping through your crystals of consciousness, they don't just leave off information. See, that was what they discovered. This is why neutrinos have mass. See, what they discovered was that neutrinos, as they moved through the Earth, oscillated. In other words, they reacted to the matter field. And only matter does that. And when it reacts to the matter field, when it oscillates, it takes on a relationship with what it is oscillating with. It's like the white car and the red car banging into each other, a little bit of paint on each. That neutrino flying through you, leaving off its information, also leaves you, taking you with it. I'm 57. And neutrinos travel at 186,000 miles a second. So for 57 light years, that is for 57 years, traveling at slightly less than 186,000 miles a second, from the moment that I came into the world, the information of my existence has already penetrated billions of miles, billions and billions and billions of miles in every direction in space. And not just me. You, everyone. Everything on this planet that's endowed with the crystal of consciousness is not simply receiving, but transmitting. Transmitting. We're putting all of that out. And it didn't start yesterday. We have life on this planet documented for about 4 billion years. For about 4 billion years, there has been crystal information transmitted from this place outward in all directions. All of you in your lifetime, you've already touched stars. It's my joke about Mars, because I love this joke about Mars. I mean, after all, Mars is prime crystal. The neutrino field goes through the crystal. It gives us the Martian impression. And it gives us the Martian impression based on where Mars is, because wherever Mars is, it's taking in a different background neutrino field from the stars behind it in that sense. And we get this Martian-tainted neutrino information that comes into us. But you have to see something. That every breath you take reaches Mars before the breath is finished. I mean, you're constantly in contact with Mars, or anything else for that matter that surrounds us. Now imagine what it would be like if we had a consciousness field that was truly attuned, where we could all meld in together. We could change Mars. Just like that. I mean, I think it's a real joke. The Americans want to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to send some tin can up there, with some poor astronauts who are going to go through horrible physical dilemmas and muscle problems and all kinds of shit just to be able to say that they've stepped on the red planet. But what I think is more fascinating is that if we decided that Mars was the planet of great plenitude and life-endowing energy, well, slowly but surely that's what it would become. See, what human beings don't know is that we have the ability to condition the gods. Why do you think that they're always so uptight any time that any of the gods hand out information to humans that they shouldn't have? Because they know damn well one day that revelation is going to lead to some smart ass like me saying, you know, we can condition them. Because we are feeding them all the time. All the time. And when you see the level of horror that exists in the consciousness field of this planet, the lack of correctness and all of these things, you can understand that we're not that far from the Babylonian planets and their values. Nothing has changed. So I want you to see the neutrino ocean as something that is more than just, okay, this is what we feed off of. It's more than that. You know, this is an interactive information program. Interactive. When the first amoeba emerged on Earth, let's say 4 billion years ago, think about what that actually means. That means that the information of the existence of that form, its information, its essential information, has been traveling in space, for 4 billion years at the speed of light. Now, if you could imagine the circle of information, how far that stretches into the totality of the being, it's amazing. And if you can imagine that you could see the neutrino pulse of consciousness moving out from our planet, let alone the neutrino field pouring in. But it's not a one-way street. It's also pouring back out. It's pouring through us and it and all of the life force that's here on the planet. We are programming. We are the instruments that are also programming the totality, which is programming us, which is us programming it, which is it, goes on and on and on and on and on. It's incredible. And of course we've got severely low level of consciousness on this planet. Awareness is not something that's easy to find. Awakeness is as rare as hen's teeth. You have a planet of deep suffering and violence, and so you can imagine what kind of information is streaming into the vehicle. We're preparing the vehicle, this huge vehicle. This is what we're doing. And look with what we're preparing it with. Think about that. It's a good thing that it doesn't really count now. Because it doesn't. From what the voice told me, we have at least 2 billion years to go before the process is complete. And most of that process will be within the Aeron vehicle. We here on this plane have a little over a millennium left. And that's simply the completion of this development. Think about the night of Brahma. Think about the end of days. Think about apocalypse. All of these things that exist in all of the religions. Basically what you're looking at, and from design, is just, it's the end of the round. It's the end of the round, the door closes. And whatever it's going to look like on the outside, whether it's a comet smashing in or this or that, or whatever the story is going to be, it'll simply be the end of life on this planet. That ending of life on this planet is actually the same thing as what happens at a crystal level when the personality crystal enters into the fetus and enters into that head center of the fetus. See, we're building up to that point. And remember that the design crystal has only one responsibility. And the responsibility that the design crystal has is that it must create a viable neocortex. I mean, that's the whole thing. You know, everything about this experiment, these two designs, trying to pretend in that sense that it has personality capacity in order to see whether the program works, or in order to see whether the form can actually work, in order to see whether consciousness really can emerge from all of this. It's an amazing journey. It's such... I'm always in awe with the beauty of mechanics, because it is so beautiful. And the work that we are doing, the work that we've been doing for, all the stretch of life that has been on this planet, that the work of consciousness crystals, all of the consciousness crystals, not simply the ones that, are incarnated, whether they be in any of the forms, whether they are inanimate, whether they are personality crystals in bundles circulating the planet out of incarnation, whether they're the vast design crystal bundle within the earth, all of this consciousness. This is what is the mainframe for the life. There is nothing else in the totality but this. It really is something to grasp. This is where it is all happening, because this is what the whole development is about. This vast potential of self-reflected consciousness at a level that we simply do not grasp. I mean, when I talk about our ability to be able to condition the planets, we have to have another way of integrating with each other before that's possible, and it's not going to happen for humans. But most of you know, that is, those of you that are interested in the Rave child coming in 2027, understand that solar plex mutation is this final stage in the program's experiment to be able to create a medium for not singular consciousness, that's been achieved, that's us, but a medium for multiple, melded consciousness, which of course is what the Rave program is all about. Now, you can see that this is just, this is the cream on the top of the cake. Because what this does is it sets up the whole possibility for the whole next level of this process, in which you're dealing with a vehicle that is going to operate as a trinary system that is going to have the capacity to meld consciousness with other forms. And it is this melded consciousness that ultimately will bring us to a place where the variability of this entity to emerge into the world that created it will demand that it knows how to get out. Or, in other language, knows how to create the circumstances so that it can leave. It's one of the great mysteries in working with birth, and trying to understand whether it is the mother that rejects the child or the child that rejects the mother. And what's very clear in that sense is that it will take the ability of the child itself to create the circumstances that will force it, in that sense, to disengage, or however you want to see the language, and to break out, however one wants to see the language, and emerge into whatever that world is going to be. It is our long-term process to move from being the conditioned to the conditioner. This is the long-term process of the way in which the consciousness field is meant to work and to interact. The personality crystal of the child has not entered the body. Design crystals are binary by nature. The two is cellular. The band is prime. When they met in the geometry, they shattered. And this is our story. Everything from the moment of the shattering, everything was the dynamic of an imperative, actually, to build a vehicle that could welcome the personality. That's the magic of conception. The magic of conception is this extraordinary form principle at work. building, 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 until all the right infrastructure is there, and that the miracle of the incarnating personality can take place. And you see, this is the learning, the program self-learning. You know, it's like these people that develop computer programs that can teach themselves. In other words, learn from their mistakes, learn from their trial and error process, learn from their experimentation. You know, this is calling it an experiment, by the way, is it may be an uncomfortable use of that word, because it infers that there is somebody running the experiment, and there isn't. There isn't. You see, the voice said something really fascinating. That's an understatement. But this crystal business, it said, call them crystals. It didn't say to me they are crystals. Call them crystals. And in calling them crystals, the advantage is the refraction. The advantage is understanding fractals through the shattering metaphor, and so forth and so on. I don't know, in essence, what it is. But what I do know is that these are the two magical keys. I don't really think that consciousness is complex in the sense of why it's there. I think it's actually very simple. In other words, the very properties of these two crystals brought into juxtaposition with each other, that the byproduct, which is not real, I mean, the biverse is not real. I mean, we're not real. This is all illusion. I mean, the old boys going all the way back to the very beginning, you know, they had it right. This is all illusion. It just is. So when people say, well, there's this great intelligence at work, you know, and there's this and blah and all that stuff, and there must have been some superior mind that, it's not true. It's not. Because you see, you don't need a superior controller at the source for the illusion to take on the nature of extraordinariness. Wow, is that nice? See, I know very clearly that when you go back to the beginning, you don't get to Ma and Pa God. You don't. You know, you get to two magical stones. I mean, there's a song of mine called The Grey Stones. You know, they're grey stones. That's what they are for me. They're these stones, they're magical stones. When I first began my mystical process, somebody gave me a bag of old hand-carved runes from about 200 years ago. And I had this, I'm a 5125, so I have a very strong connection to form principle anyway, and to magic with form. And it was amazing how much information came to me by simply running my fingers blindly, because I would never look at the stones I touched. I would just put my hand in the bag and just for a moment just focus my sensitivity to any one of them. And the juxtaposition of that was always extraordinary. I mean, it was part of my madness stage. It was before I would meet the voice, when I was in this kind of going wild, deconstructing stage. And every once in a while, people would ask me things, and yeah, it was amazing what would come from that. And there was something to grasp. You see, the inanimate has enormous potential magic to it. But it doesn't mean that the thing in and of itself is intelligent. I mean, that's the joke. It's really the joke. It's why the illusion in the Maya is to be embraced. It's a wonderful movie. Wonderful movie. Because, when you get to the source, you got a couple of stones. No joke. You really do. You have a couple of inanimate objects. It's so bizarre. And it's out of that inanimate that the illusion of animate emerges. The illusion of life emerges. It's amazing. Think about your body. If you separate all of the components of it, just break it down into components, it all becomes inanimate. All of it. Think about that. Put a human being through a blender, and you've got the inanimate. It's all illusion. All illusion. So incredible. So, when I hear all these people talking about, the great creators, this and that and the other thing, and well, no. It doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. In the beginning are a couple of gray stones.